Hello, all. I don't know how many of you will be actually tuning in, but this is my book study for my class, Reading 520 for my master's. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 3 videos. Today's video is the video that will give you basically information about the book, what the book's about, and kind of a teaser to the next 2 sessions that we'll have. So I hope that you'll learn something. I've learned a little bit from this book. It's an interesting book. It's about stations, or what they call centers, in the CENTERS centers in the classroom, and how it can work in high school just as well as it can work in elementary. So what I'm going to do is I've made a PowerPoint. So I just have to find it. Here we go. All right. So it's called Literacy and Learning Centers for the Big Kids. It's by Katherine McKnight. I found this book on Amazon looking through content literacy to see if there was something that I wanted to teach. And this one's interesting. All right, so let's start with this. Why should we use centers for the big kids? This is the big overarching question posed by Katherine McKnight. Literacy and Learning Centers, the LLC, also known as stations. So that'll be referred to often throughout this book study. So if you hear LLC, that's what it is. Don't be confused by LDC, which many of us have gone through. That's been what, 5 years ago or so. So it's LLC. Katherine McKnight, she has been teaching quite some time, so she is experienced and she has used this system. She actually goes around the country and teaches this system of using centers as a way for high school kids to learn more. There are a couple quotes that I wanted to share with you. Navigating the bridge that connects reading, writing, and literacy skill development with content knowledge continues to challenge us. She acknowledges that in education, we have a really hard time getting these kids to be able to comprehend like they should, comprehend content. Because we all have so much time, and I put in parentheses, haha, and I think she was saying that or implying that tongue in cheek. McKnight contends that we can cover more content in less time through center-based instruction, which I know all of us would really like that to happen. If there's something that maximizes our time while getting the kids to learn something, because we don't have enough time for everything that we're expected to do. So here's the challenge. So we'll look at these things. Data from 2013 indicates that over 60% of our high school students are not reading with proficiency. High school students lack the basic ability to read text for information and therefore are not college and career ready. This next statistic really struck me. It says more than 40% of college freshmen are required to take remedial courses before they begin work on their degree requirements. And that, to me, I don't know so much. There's a failure somewhere, and I don't think it's us. There's something that we're not doing, obviously, but I think it's the way that the system is structured and what we are expected to do as teachers. So my intent with this book study was to give us something that will help us, not give us more work, or not necessarily less work, but work that actually is meaningful and that does help the kids. Unlike elementary school teachers, I was neither trained nor required to take any college courses in literacy when I prepared to become a teacher. And all of these quotes are from McKnight and her book. And honestly, when I went back to get this master's degree in as a reading specialist, I was given these classes, and it's not that I didn't have any idea what they were saying, but when I went through the secondary program at Concord, they do not teach us the same things that they teach the elementary teachers, obviously, but the main thing about reading comprehension and the learning of reading We are not given those tools like elementary school teachers are, because obviously the kids are supposed to already know all this or already have all this behind them by the time they get to us, but that's just not the case. And I'll go over that here in just a minute. Sadly, this is still the reality in many educational settings. So like I said just now, at Concord, I know they don't do it, and at many colleges they don't. And they acknowledge, I know a couple professors have acknowledged that high school teachers that go into the reading specialist program are at a disadvantage because we haven't been taught everything that the elementary teachers have. All right. So McKnight points out that there are 6 common factors that lead to school success and student growth. 1, every child reads something he or she chooses. 2, every child reads accurately. 3, every child reads something he or she understands. 4, every child writes about something personally meaningful. 5, every child talks with peers about reading and writing. And 6, every child listens to a fluent adult read aloud. Does this happen all the time? No, not every child has an adult that they listen to at home, that's for sure, that an adult that reads to them, reads aloud to them. Many of our public school kids come to us and there are no books around their house that their parents read or that their parents read to them. So these are factors, and if a child goes through the educational system and they've had these 6 factors, then of course they're going to be successful, but we know that that doesn't always happen. All right, so 5 components of reading. Now, this is what I was talking about that high school teachers aren't really taught in college, English teachers specifically. The elementary school teachers are taught this, and we kind of know about it, but we don't really concern ourselves with it because we don't have to use this, or we haven't had to in the past. So phonemic awareness. Phonemes are the smallest units that make up language. In English, there are 41 phonemes. When combined, phonemes create syllables and words. Phonemic awareness refers to the ability to identify and manipulate phonemes in spoken words. So I know I've probably spoken Chinese to you in some ways, but you're aware of the phonemes, the phonics. You're probably more aware of phonics. So that's the second component of reading. We call the predictable relationship between phonemes, which is the spoken language, and graphemes, the letters and sound in written language, phonics. Readers use these relationships to recognize familiar words and to decode unfamiliar ones. I know you've heard of hooked on phonics, that way of teaching kids how to read. I personally do not remember how I learned how to read. I don't think that we did phonics, but at some point I just learned how to read. I don't know why I don't remember that. And maybe you can think about how you learned how to read. What did you learn in elementary school? Or was it an easy process that, like me, you didn't have to really think about it? But going back to those 6 things, I think that most of us grew up in homes where we were nurtured with literature or children's books, and we had an adult talking to us, reading to us, helping us write. So things like that, I guess that makes our reading journey a little bit easier than some. All right, number 3, vocabulary. Students know and understand the meanings of words and can use them with flexibility and precision, which if they've read a lot, been read to, that happens. Number 4, reading fluency. Learners are able to identify words accurately and effortlessly and read them within a text using appropriate intonation, stress, and phrasing. We often assign fluency as an instructional focus for younger students, but it is quite relevant for older students, especially as these readers encounter more complex, discipline-specific text. And if you've ever had kids read aloud in class, you can see that sometimes their reading fluency isn't that great. I mean, they can read and they're reading to you, but they aren't stressing. They don't have that intonation. They don't have the stress and phrasing. So that is something that you need to look at. Comprehension. This is the process and product of constructing meaning from what we read. It consists of the interaction between a reader and a text which occurs for a purpose and within a context. And I wanted to read you this quote to kind of sum it up. And it's not crazy long, but it's a little long. What do the 5 components of reading mean for our older students, and how does this impact the teaching of our different content areas? Oftentimes, I encounter teachers who report that their students can decode text but become puzzled when asked about the content of what they have read. Many of our students can decode and they seem to read, but they aren't able to make sense of the text. As teachers of adolescents, our students need us to primarily focus on comprehension skills and the development of academic and content-specific language. If a student at this level, and this is 4th through 12th grade, is still having difficulty with phonics, phonemic awareness, and fluency, they need the support of a reading interventionist. I often assert that it is completely unfair to expect a content area teacher to teach these skills. It is especially unfair to the struggling student. They need an expert who is trained in how to teach reading. And that's one reason I kind of like this book and I like this author, is because she knows what it's like to be a high school teacher, and she knows what it's like to try to teach a child who doesn't really know how to read, or if they can read, they're not able to have that reading fluency, and they're definitely not comprehending. So then that carries over to our testing that we do, primarily with our SAT in the high school. All right, so reasons why centers work for the big kids. So this is her way of kind of hooking us in. Why do we want to do centers? And this is in the first chapter of this book. So I'll cover the subsequent chapters in our next 2 sessions, but this kind of gives you some groundwork for what we're going to look at. Gradual release of responsibility, GRR, if we run into that again. I do it. This is where a teacher-led mini lesson or whole group instruction. The teacher models a particular skill, usually through a think aloud or a read aloud. We do it, and this is pair or small group. In small groups, the students practice the skill that was demonstrated during the teacher-led mini lesson or whole group instruction. And that mini lesson might remind you again of that LDC that we did years ago. And honestly, that LDC program that we did, was a meaningful way of doing things. It was just a matter of how we were taught how to do that or not taught how to do that. And then you do it. This is where the centers come in. The literacy and learning centers include clearly focused activities that foster skill development and content knowledge. So I feel like there is going to be a little bit more work at the front end of these centers, where you have to actually figure out what these focus activities are going to be that you want your students to use to better be able to reach the goal that you want them to reach. So on page 14, I had another quote that I wanted to read you. The Literacy and Learning Center model shifts the focus of learning onto the student, while the teacher provides modeling and guidance through structured activities. When literacy and learning centers are aligned with the GRR model, students can work toward developing a greater range of skills in order to promote independent learning. And isn't that really what we're out to do? To make them independent, to have us more as a facilitator than the person telling them what to do all the time or telling them what to learn. They need to be in charge of their own learning experience, because that's what they're going to be doing the rest of their life. All right, the next one, student self-regulation. Student self-regulation for learning and literacy develops within a cycle of learning, which can be identified as the 4 phases of engaging in a task. How well will I do? And this is where we're fostering confidence. Many lessons provide students with models for literacy skill development in specific content areas and disciplines. Phase 2, what will I do to do well? Setting and managing goals. Goal setting can occur during guided practice and or when students are working with the teacher and peers at a teacher-led center. Phase 3, how well am I doing at doing well? Monitoring and adjusting. Students can monitor and adjust while working in a collaborative centers in the teacher-led center or at a designated reflection center. And phase 4, how well did I do at doing well? Reviewing and reflecting. Students have opportunities to reflect and revise while working in collaborative centers as well as in the teacher-led center. Now, these centers, while I'm going over these phases, sometimes our classrooms are not big enough or aren't set up where we can actually move kids around in different centers. And that's what I think that's a phase that we need to get to, where we are able to move our rooms around and able to foster that confidence that the kids need, and to be able to have the teacher at a certain location or a reflection center at a certain location. But all of that is logistics. It's the this whole 4 phases of engaging in a task that give us that momentum to want to get our classroom in order and able to do this. Okay, so we have building blocks, and this is formative assessment. This is one of those reasons why centers work. And formative assessment is when this is not necessarily grades. I mean, you can give grades for formative assessment, but this is for you. Formative assessment is for you to determine where the kid is in a certain process. So learning progressions should clearly articulate the sub-goals of the ultimate learning goal, and where the element is embedded in the LLC model. And we'll learn more about these because we haven't done chapter 2 or chapter 3. So we will look at more in depth at the model itself, but this is giving you a general idea of what formative assessment is. Learning goals and criteria for success. This is where learning goals and criteria for success should be clearly identified and communicated to the students. Students should know what we're trying to get them to learn. They should know what our content standards are. And I think many of us don't even put those up on the board or inform our kids what the content standards are and what we're doing. But we should do that, and because they need to know. Descriptive feedback. Students should be provided with evidence-based feedback that is linked to the intended instructional outcomes and criteria for success. A lot of these progressions or building blocks are taking place in the teacher-led center. So you still have a really big role, as you always do in the classroom with these centers. Self and peer assessment. Both self and peer assessment are important for providing students an opportunity to think metacognitively about their learning. They're not going to know that they're thinking metacognitively, but these formative assessments help them. And then the collaboration, a classroom culture in which teachers and students are partners in learning should be established. So instead of you being the dictator in the front of the classroom, you form a partnership with the kids, and getting the kids to buy into that at the very beginning of the year is the most important thing, I think, where, we're here to learn, we're here for a job. And I know it's very, very hard to do because there are a lot of distractions with that, but hopefully with maybe these centers, that could make it easier. All right, and the next one is differentiated instruction. We all know what differentiated instruction is, but this is a definition that's taken out of the book, and it's not by Dr. McKnight herself. But let me look on that page so I can tell you. His name is Rick Wormelli, and he describes it as this. Differentiated instruction is doing what's fair for students. It's a collection of best practices strategically employed to maximize students' learning at every turn, including giving them tools to handle anything that is undifferentiated. It requires us to do different things for different students, some or a lot of the time, in order for them to learn when the general classroom approach does not meet students' needs. It is not individualized instructions, though that may happen from time to time as warranted. It's whatever works to advance the students. It's highly effective teaching. And again, I know that the differentiation, you all work this into your lessons most of the time, but we think of the auditory, or we think of the visual, or we think of the kinesthetic. So this is where we are trying to get to know our students, and for better or worse, our 6-period day does help us do that, because even though our days are shorter, we have them all year. So we can look at their progress from day 1 to the end and be able to differentiate for them throughout the year. And it does take more time, and it takes added effort, but I think that with these centers that will help. 12 characteristics of differentiated instruction. Integrate strategies for differentiation and response to intervention, RTI, in your classroom, and we may run into that RTI again later. Identify learning goals. Examine your professional practices and skills in concert with your students' needs. Apply practical, reliable, and valid assessment strategies. Create differentiated learning plans based on students' present needs. Use choice to motivate your students. We're down on 7. Use flexible grouping for your students. Be flexible in your teaching and responsive to your students' ongoing needs. Develop student responsibility and independence in their learning. And I think that's really important. If you develop student responsibility and independence in their learning, being in a classroom is a breeze. And we all know that, right? I had quite a few students last year who were very independent. They checked Schoology, they knew what was going on, and they read, but they were students that were honestly probably shouldn't have been in a regular ed classroom setting. They should have been in an honor setting. But we've got to get our regular ed kids to that point too. But I think it's because they're intimidated possibly by the content, or they've convinced themselves that they don't like the content. Oh, I hate English. I hate English. I don't like to read and I don't like to write. But oftentimes they have a lot to say when they write. So it's just giving that responsibility to the students to form that independence. Use ethical assessment practices that grow students. They're not punitive. So again, those formative assessments, don't say, oh gosh, you're wrong, you get a 0, or you're wrong, you get a 50, or you didn't turn that in, you're going to fail. Try to work with them to see why they didn't get that in. And I know it's easier said than done. But trying not to punish them with their grades or their assessments, that's an ongoing battle, I guess. Not really a battle, but that's an ongoing problem. How do we grade our kids, and how do we grade them effectively? Differentiating learning for students with special needs and gifted students while incorporating learning profiles. And we do that already, especially if we have inclusion. Number 12, create a teacher-led leadership team as your school transitions to a differentiated instruction paradigm. And that's if this textbook would be adopted school-wide. But it is really good, as we know, to have teachers that you can talk to, bounce ideas off of, and further your instruction techniques. I love it when I go in somebody else's classroom and I see how they work, because I look at myself then and think, well, I'm not doing that. I need to improve here, or they're not doing that. Maybe I'll still continue what I'm doing. In other words, you get to look at another teacher and see how they teach, and learn what you can from them, especially teachers who've been around for a while. All right, so we're at the end, and that's the last, that was chapter 1. So that was basically an introduction of why we need centers and how centers can be a productive part of our classroom instruction. So I am going to go back to our Teams meeting, and now and share, so you don't have to look at all my stuff. So next time we will look at the rest of the book, not in the very next recording. In the next recording, we'll do, I don't know if it'll be 1 or 2 chapters, but in the next 2 recordings, I'll have more information for you of how these centers can be implemented in your classroom and what you can do. And there are all kinds of templates in this book that I can share with you if you want me to. So just let me know. And I'll look forward to your comments. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to our next meeting. Thank you so much.